طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So last time we started to talk about the introduction. We talked about some fundamental definitions for what internet security is, what computer security is, what is the difference between security services and security mechanisms, and what are the different examples in each one. Today we are going to continue that discussion and finish chapter 1. So we stopped here at this slide where we talked about security services and some of the examples of security services, starting from confidentiality, integrity, non-repudiation. And for each of these services, we talked about subtypes in terms of like peer entity confidentiality and so on, whether it's connection-oriented or connection-less. Here we need to also classify the security mechanisms. So when it comes to security mechanisms, we can group some of these mechanisms together in order to provide some security service, as we have discussed last time. So for example, if we need to have confidentiality, we need to have encipherment, we need to have, like, for example, routing control, we may have some traffic padding. All of these are techniques or mechanisms that can together achieve confidentiality or concealment to the information. All of these techniques are related or have some aspect in concealing information, okay? So they serve the big objective of confidentiality. Okay, so when it comes to encipherment, encipherment is encryption. So encipherment here talks about the use of mathematical algorithms to transform data into another form which cannot really have any kind of correlation to the original data, and it's in fact very hard to even reverse engineer from this transformed form into the original data. So we'll discuss that actually in chapter 2. That's the main topic of today. When it comes to digital signature, on the other side, digital signature is unlike by encipherment. Encipherment actually transforms the plain text into ciphertext, right? Digital signature, it does not transform the data. It actually appends something to the data, and this digital signature tries to tries to avoid any kind of modification or alteration to the content of the message. Okay, whether it's enciphered or whether it's plain text or ciphertext. So we need to append something. So this is the actual data, whether it's plain text or ciphertext. So what we need to do is that we add to it some digital signature, okay, such that if anything in this message has been modified, altered, this digital signature will declare this as altered a message, so we don't consider it. Okay. Access control here talks about a variety of mechanisms that enforce access rights to resources. We all, especially people who are working in IT, they know what access control is. So unlike by authentication is used to get some authorized access to the resource. Access control is different. Access control is to give different levels of privileges to the users, okay? Based on his credentials or her credentials, okay? Data integrity talks about the general mechanism of achieving data integrity, and actually this is the exact same name for the service itself. But data integrity can be actually used as a mechanism. It refers to a mechanism as well as it refers to the service of integrity, where we have a variety of mechanisms used to, so it's not like, this does not refer to one mechanism. It refers to possibly one or more mechanisms which are used to achieve integrity, okay? So I wouldn't actually name it a mechanism by itself. It's better to name it as a service, and the mechanism you need to use data signature, digital signature, as well as some other hashing techniques that we will talk about. digital signature in addition to some hashing techniques. Together they achieve integrity, as we will talk later. Authentication exchange. When it comes to authentication exchange, this is actually a mechanism. Exchange, we mean that we have to have a protocol in order for the user to exchange his or her credentials in a way to the system so that he or she can gain access, okay? So there is a protocol to it. And usually there is like some server out there which maintains all the credentials of users, and I need to have a certain network protocol with that server to exchange my credentials to the server, based on which the server will grant me access to the entire system. واضح كده؟ So authentication exchange refers to the mechanism intended for the user to exchange his or her credentials to the system in order to gain access. ماشي؟ Traffic padding. Do you remember what traffic padding is? So padding in general is used in many ways in networks to align. يعني in network 1 حتى you should study that. Padding in general is used to align some packets based on certain length. So the packet should have like minimum length of X, okay? So if the actual data is less than X, what do? We add some padding, يعني some stuffing. It's like when you get a shipment مثلا from Amazon ولا حاجة زي كده, you open the box, you see like some kind of something around it, right? So it's like the box itself has a bigger size. So we have to put some stuffing around the shipment in order to align it within the box, right? So these are some stuffing bits that we usually put around the packet in order to align the length of the packet based on certain standard length. However, this padding is for alignment. Here we talk about traffic padding, which has a different purpose. Here, traffic padding is used to confuse the attacker. So I'm not trying to align to a specific size of the packet. I'm actually trying to confuse the attacker by appending a variable size bits to the packet such that the attacker can see like variable size packets. So even if the protocol itself defines like a fixed length packet, as we said, even fixed length packet would give some indication to the attacker, right? To simplify or to help the attacker to do some traffic analysis, right? Just by keeping the length of the packet fixed, that's actually information. We are giving the attacker information for free, right? So to avoid this, we're using traffic padding, and traffic padding tries to append variable size stuffing bits to the packet, usually before encryption, okay? In order to have a variable size cipher text that can confuse the attacker to give the attacker no information whatsoever about the actual content of the data. واضح كده؟
So the padding is
So traffic padding here is used for security. Yes. Yes. Is to try to keep the packet size eventually variable. Right? So that's what traffic padding is used for. We'll talk about this in all the protocols. It's going to be used in all the security protocols that we will talk about in starting from chapter 4 and 5. Okay, type routing control. As we said, routing control can in fact be used to also conceal the information, because the attacker can listen to a particular part of the network, right? So we have like a network which is composed of many nodes. Okay, so if the sender sends to a specific receiver through a fixed route all the time, again, this gives information to the attacker to try to listen to a particular node in the network, and listening to this network will allow the attacker to get all the information that he or she wants, right? So instead, routing control here talks about the fact that I may actually use different routes to reach to the same destination, okay? To try to also maneuver and send the data through different routes, in which case it will be very hard for the attacker, even if he or she listens to a specific part of the network, he will not be able to get anything. Or he will get only small part of the data. So I'm trying to also use routing control to confuse the attacker. واضح كده؟ Notarization is a mechanism. Again, I'm just throwing like very, very small hint about each of these mechanisms, and then later on we will be able to talk in more details about each of these in a separate discussion. Okay? Notarization is in fact a technique which is used by a third party, usually we call it certificate authority, okay, which tries to vet, okay, that whenever you send any message, it vets the fact that this message is sent by Amr, and then Ahmed has received this message. So this helps in what? It helps the objective of, huh? لا لا أيوة, non-repudiation. Non-repudiation talks about the fact that if Amr sends a message later on, he cannot deny that he sent this message. Is that actually a requirement in security? Yes. Yes, right? Because this helps us to try to trace back any kind of attack to the person that he initiated that attack. It's very important, okay? So non-repudiation, or someone tries to sign a document, a very critical document, مثلا in a bank, and later on he says, no, I did not sign. No, you did sign. We can prove that this is your signature and nobody else. Okay, so non-repudiation is very, very important in security. And the way we do that is usually by having, usually we have, how do we do this? How do we do this? Yeah. Usually we do that through the use of a third party. So this is the sender, this is the receiver, and usually we have a third party, we call it certificate authority, okay? So whenever the sender sends a message, a notification goes to the certificate authority to certify that indeed this sender has sent the message. So later on, if this sender says, no, I did not send, no, you did send, okay? And there is like some kind of arbitrator, okay, which uses the mechanism of notarization. We notarize the fact that this sender has indeed sent this message, and this receiver has indeed received the message, and nobody else. Okay?
He also keep the copy of the key in order to...
No, we do the notarization through the exchange of sometimes we exchange the certificates. Okay? And as we will talk about later, in a later stage, certificate use public keys, not private keys. When we talk about public cryptography, we'll talk about this, okay? So, but there is some kind of information about that really kind of embeds in the message who sent it, and we always have to verify that the sender is indeed the one who sent this message and nobody else.
So the certificate authority keeps logs of all these interactions so they can verify later, or only verifiable interactions are allowed through and other messages are allowed through and other messages?
We have some message-to-message notarization, and we have some connection level notarization. So it can be done at the beginning of the communication, like per connection, so that for each message we also do some kind of a technique to confirm or to ensure non-repudiation. Usually it's a little bit different. So some of them they use certificate-based technique. Some of them they use some data signature based technique. So there is message-based authentication. There is connection-level authentication. There are different ways. ماشي؟ بس to answer your question, it could be based on a message-to-message level. It could be based on some initial connection establishment. Either way.
Do they save the logs of these messages?
Not of course not. No. They keep only the fact that Amr is the one who sent this message. They just keep that, and they put this in the audit in the audit logs, but they don't have anything to do with the message itself. Nobody can store the message itself. Go ahead. I don't know how. No. مش عارف صراحة. طيب. Any of these mechanisms, usually, as we will discuss later, any of these mechanisms can be used within a level of a layer. So we can perform, like for example, routing control clearly is in the IP layer, مثلا. Okay? Traffic padding can be done in any of the layers, but usually the scope of any of these mechanisms is one layer. Okay? Usually it's performed within one layer. There are certain mechanisms which are agnostic to any of the layers. They are irrelevant to be conducted or performed in a layer-based model. Okay, like for example, مثلا اللي هو trusted functionality. Trusted functionality ده مثلا it's just to define certain policy مثلا on the passwords. This has nothing to do with a specific layer. ماشي. Security label here talks about مثلا some kind of a, مثلا when we send a message itself, we put some kind of a watermark inside it, or مثلا when we store a file, we put some kind of flags which really marks the properties of this file, whether it's read only or it has some writing access or some security label which is stored with the information, okay, which has something to do with the security. And again, this has nothing to do of the layered stack. It's not to be performed in TCP or IP. It has nothing to do with that. Event detection is based on, usually based on some audit logs. So event detection is a mechanism, okay, which can be used to detect certain security event or security breach. Like from this mechanism, for example, looks at the audit logs, the security audit trail. Security audit trail on its own is actually a mechanism which maintains the security audit logs. Okay, based on these audit logs, the event detection mechanism will look at these logs and then it will say, oh, okay, so based on these events, there is a suspicion that there is some kind of intrusion to the system. Okay, and the event detection does not necessarily imply any kind of prevention technique. There is event detection and there is some kind of prevention technique. Because you can detect the event that there is some kind of attack, but detecting the attack itself is good because it allows you to stop it. But sometimes there is already some damage that have been done. Okay? So whether or not you can recover from this damage, this is actually the prevention techniques, which could be, in some cases, impossible to do. The damage has already been done, خلاص, you cannot do anything about it. It's just that you need to do event detection to stop the attack. That's it. That's all you can do. ماشي? So this is what we refer to as security recovery. Okay? Recovery here refers to the prevention mechanisms that you can conduct in the system in order to recover from a certain attack. ماشي كده؟ Intrusion detection techniques or intrusion prevention techniques in general are layer agnostic, and they are done usually on the level of the system as a whole. The very last chapter we will talk about intrusion detection and prevention techniques and how it's done in a distributed system. Usually it's not done in a specific layer. Usually it's done at the system level.
Intrusion detection of this pervasive security mechanism can be used in different layers.
لا هو it's used on the system level, but it's not to be done in a specific layer. Like any of these mechanisms, for example, in TCP layer there is TLS. TLS protocol itself, it has to provide confidentiality, non-repudiation, and right? For each of these services, it uses these techniques. All of them, actually, most of them. ماشي? Except for maybe routing control. Routing control is to be done in IPsec, مثلا. Okay? But all of these mechanisms, they are usually used to provide the services which are needed to provide security in مثلا TLS level or transport layer level, right? But intrusion detection has nothing to do with a specific layer. Usually it's done for the entire system. Usually it's done to the entire distributed system, regardless of whatever layer we're talking about. Okay, it's just to detect that there is any kind of intrusion in any layer, but it doesn't matter. Any layer. Okay, but the attack is there's some kind of intrusion to the system. So this is the metrics that we have talked about last time. We said that this is this is the security service, and what kind of mechanisms that can be engaged or grouped together in order to provide that service, right? So, for example, for peer entity authentication, we need some kind of authentication exchange, which is, again, the mechanism which is used to exchange your authentication or credentials with the server, as we have discussed. In addition to some kind of encipherment, which is also used to encipher the credentials themselves. Because as we will see, we cannot just send the password or the user ID or something like exposed. We cannot do that. So we have to kind of use encipherment as well. And so on. So any of these services, we need to group one or two or three mechanisms that can be grouped together in order to provide that objective or that service. At the same time, one mechanism can serve multiple of these objectives. Okay? It has some aspect to serve this service, it has another aspect to serve this service, and so on. So it's a many-to-many relationship in general. It's not one-to-many relationship.
The difference between data integrity in the mechanism and data integrity in service.
We talked about this. A data integrity mechanism talks about possibly it talks about multiple mechanisms which are used to ensure data integrity. So when we refer to the data integrity mechanism, we possibly group together like some kind of digital signature with some kind of hashing technique. Together they are needed to provide data integrity as a service, as we will see. But in order to provide, like for example, data integrity or data integrity as well, we need we have data integrity itself. Bardo serves on non-repudiation. As we will see later, these digital signatures can in fact be used in certificates to allow for non-repudiation and so on. But data integrity as a mechanism, it refers to possibly two things that can be done. And actually this will make sense in chapter 4, I guess, because sometimes actually you need to group two mechanisms together. They work hand in hand. They have to be integrated together. ماشي؟ زي الهاشing with digital signatures والأشياء دي, they need to be grouped together. So when they are grouped together, we can refer to this as data integrity because it's in fact combining two techniques into one. So we'll talk about this more. ماشي؟ طيب, attack surface is a new fundamental definition that we need to talk about. Attack surface here consists of a reachable and exploitable vulnerability in the system. Okay? So for example, we have some open ports. We have to have some open ports. We don't have a choice. Sometimes people, some mentality which I have actually had to deal with is like, in order to provide security, we have to close all the ports. Closing all the ports would mean that even the legitimate users cannot access the system. So the mentality of providing security by closing doors and windows, it's not appropriate, right? So no matter what you do, you have some attack surfaces. They exist in the system, whether accepted or not, right? Like for example, you cannot say that HTTP port 80, let's close it. Close it ازاي يعني? How come? Everybody accesses the system, Blackboard واشياء زي through HTTP port 80 يعني. We cannot do this. أو خلاص let's not use HTTP. ما ينفعش. ما برضو ده service availability. ما by service here we mean like HTTP service. Let's close HTTP service. We cannot. ماشي؟ Opening these represent some kind of a exploitable vulnerability to the system. Okay? So the right mentality or the intelligence here is to keep services and ports open but برضه secure. ده بقى الايه؟ That's why we need يعني intelligent people like yourself that requires intelligent design, that requires careful design. Okay? So the attack services, they have to exist. But the key issue is how to keep them existing, but at the same time keep the system secure. That's the equation that we need to achieve. Code that processes incoming data. Like for example, in any kind of web page, you can in fact say like view source and you can see all the JavaScript. صح? JavaScript is viewable. I can see this code and use that code to attack the system. That's an attack service. Okay? So it's viewable. It happens in the JavaScript. It's viewable. Everybody can see it. And in fact, it actually exposes the system. In many cases, يعني some حتى web servers, they forbid, they disallow some kind of use of JavaScript in certain locations. And it's against security. Okay? أو مثلا web forms. أو some kind of SQL queries. All of these, they form some attack surface. I can use all these exploitable parts to attack the system. Okay? Or an employee. Humans themselves, they are big attack surfaces. No offense, Ahmed. I was talking to some people from HMC. I was talking to them about security. Some guy told me that we have done a quick study and we have discovered that actually a big percentage of the normal users of the system, they still use password 1 2 3 4 5 6. Yeah, many people, they still use this stuff. So that's why we need to have like some policies, their trusted functionality, some policies enforced on the users and so. But even though some people, no matter what you do, they get to social media. They expose all kind of information about themselves. And you don't know, people can actually utilize this information from social media and they can use it later on to attack the system. Yeah.
This is the easiest way.
Yeah, this is the easiest way. And yeah. So human themselves, they are big attackers, huge attackers, especially, that's why here you have to build awareness. You have to build awareness. People need to be aware. They don't have to expose their identity, their information unnecessarily on all types of public venues, and they think that by doing this they gain some kind of popularity ولا حاجة زي كده. In fact, you are exposing yourself to some security abuse and so on. ماشي كده؟ طيب, so all of these examples we can sort of categorize them into 3 different categories. طبعا network attack surface, so we can in fact group the first 2 here to network attack surface. ماشي? So network related attack surface are if you keep some ports open or something, these are network attack surface. ماشي? These 2 مثلا we can group them to software attack surface. When you have like some code exposed or some web forms or something like this, so we can group these 2 as software attack surface. ماشي? So it's just categorization to these examples. طبعا the last one is clearly the human attack surface. Okay? طيب. So we are bad people, we want to attack. Okay? We need sorry.
SQL injection is human attack.
Secure, sorry?
SQL injection entering into
We can classify it as software.
It can be done by both
Or what?
It can be done by a system or by a human as well.
Yeah, but it requires writing some SQL queries or something like this. صح? Yes, some kind of a script. Okay, so yes, we can measure. Okay, we can consider both. That's fine. I will let it go. You can consider it both.
So it's done by human majority.
يعني
It's not a human surface.
ما هو JavaScript eventually is done by human. We can argue that JavaScript is done by human. Yeah.
But you can't consider it as a human surface.
Yes, يعني
You can't, right?
that's yes يعني ال SQL itself is it's done by human, but at the end of the day it's some kind of SQL script that it's exposed that the attacker can in fact use to attack the system. ماشي؟ إنما human attack surfaces are human who expose their identity to facilitate the attacker to attack the system. Okay? In any case, now we want to attack the system.
Or can be tricked.
Or
by
can be?
social- Or can be tricked by social
Trick,
engineering.
it's social engineering. Yeah, that's what we're saying. ماشي. Now we are bad people who want to attack the system. Attacking the system usually follows what we call attack trees. Okay? Attack trees, they kind of logically define a set of activities, okay, which can be grouped together in a tree-like fashion that facilitate the successful attack to the system. Okay, so the attack trees usually they promote the concept of divide and conquer. So I want to attack the Pentagon, for example. That's the objective. So this is the root of the attack tree. So my original objective, attack the Pentagon. This is the objective. How do we do this? Do you think that we can attack the Pentagon by just using passwords 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and trying that? Of course not. So this is a very primitive way of trying to do or achieve a big objective. So we have to really divide this objective into smaller sub-objectives and keep doing that until we get to a set of low-level activities, okay, which can be performed either in a sequential way or in parallel way in order to try to achieve certain level of success to achieve the objective, okay? So the different branches of the tree constitute like some big job that needs to be done, okay, in order to perform some level of attack. And this branch, multiple branches can be ANDed together or can be ORed. So, like for example, I can, for example, perform certain مثلا type of man-in-the-middle attack to try to listen to. First, I do some traffic analysis, for example, to try to listen to the traffic that is going on. Okay. After doing some traffic analysis and extracting some key information, okay, so now I gain some valuable information to the next step to perform some kind of a man-in-the-middle attack. Man-in-the-middle attack, based on the information that I got, I can use it to prove that I am mamduh, whereas I'm humble. So I can let people know that I'm a legitimate user so that they can give me more information. When they give me more information, I can gain more and more information to the level that I can get some root access to a critical resource in the system. So that has to be done by performing logical steps. Okay? So it's a hierarchical data structure that represents a set of potential techniques and activities that need to be done in order to exploit some vulnerabilities in the system. So the security incident that is a goal of the attack is actually represented as the root of the tree. It's like attack the Pentagon. This is the big. I don't want to be picked on this word, but any kind of big objective, big ambitious objective. This is usually the root of the tree. Imagine?
Can attack be done through electricity?
Yeah, attacking smart grid.
Because Pentagon is producing their own electricity because of that, to avoid attacks.
طبعا, yeah.
So,
Yeah, we're talking about, it's just an example. We're talking about a big, ambitious goal that we want to achieve. Okay? Whether it's attack مثلا smart grid of the city of XYZ or...
so that is the system we are accessing to stop the electricity. That is different. That is again on the network. I'm talking about can we have a modem to transmit bits on electric channel, electricity wire?
Yes, there is like this is irrelevant of the scope of that. But yes, there is like power line communication. You can transfer bits over power lines. There are some technologies to do that.
So
Power line communication.
So they are smart.
Yes, of course, yes. يعني هنا احنا we're talking about security. So security is to exploit any kind of vulnerability to the system, whether it's power lines. طبعا when I talk about smart grid, I don't necessarily mean power line communication. I mean بقى اللي هو meters. These meters, at the end of the day, they use some kind of network protocols. Okay, so if I can gain some access to these meters, I can change their measurements. I can do whatever. I can actually switch the power from going into different direction to another direction. I can perform huge amount of damage to the entire city.
I mean, it could be the system that is managing the electricity
Right.
of the Pentagon.
Yes.
It's connected with other systems that do other activities.
Right.
One of them like network management systems.
Yes.
So they can access from the electricity grid management systems to network management systems.
Yes, but in any case, احنا here we're trying to define a big objective.
Yeah.
For a big bad objective طبعا اللي هو attack يعني. In order to achieve this objective, we need to divide it or classify it into branches in a form of a tree, and this tree, it goes all the way until it reaches to the terminal nodes. We'll see that, the terminal nodes, right? These terminal nodes usually refer to well-defined and precise tasks that needs to be done, okay, in order to serve the big objective. يعني to just illustrate that, this is an example. بلاش عشان احنا قلنا attack the printing كتير فايه bank account compromise. So I can do bank account compromise by dividing that into sub-objectives. These sub-objectives usually they are any one of them, okay, can achieve that objective. Okay? So for example, I can do that using like some user credential compromise. Or I can do that using some injection commands. I can inject something to the system, okay? Or I can do some user credential guessing. So here we usually refer to like some مثلا I can use guessing by trial and error, or I can use some traffic analysis, okay? So I divided the big objective into smaller objectives. These green ones, these are terminal nodes, which refers to the actual mechanism that I will use in order to perform that attack. So I use user surveillance, I use theft of token, lower tokens, the token, physical tokens. يعني I will hire someone to go and deceive someone to get the physical token from him مثلا.
This is social engineering.
لا مش social engineering, no human يعني physical theft, okay? So I will steal the physical token from your pocket مثلا. This physical token usually it actually displays the code that you need to use in order to authenticate yourself to the system. So based on that, I can authenticate myself to the system on your behalf. Yeah. So all of these are well-defined tasks that I can execute, whether بقى collectively, okay, or in parallel, such that I can achieve the bigger objective. Okay, so this is what we refer to by attack trees. واضحة النقطة دي؟ Okay.
So our final goal is to reach the green.
لا, the final goal is to do bank account compromise. I want to attack your bank account and be able to access it. And once I access it, I can do whatever. I can transfer money, I can transfer money to myself, I can do whatever. So now I want to compromise a specific bank account or multiple bank accounts. Okay, so I need to perform these steps. So طبعا why do we define attack trees? Because some of these tasks they might fail. Okay, but I have other parallel branches, so maybe this one will fail, but that's fine. This one will succeed. In which case If this one succeeds, خلاص, I achieved the bigger goal. خلاص. But some of these might actually fail, which is fine. By having this attack tree, I provide some redundancy to the different ways of how to attack and how to achieve the attack. So any of them that succeeds will lead to achieving the objective, and that's what I'm seeking. That's fine. This is not the objective. The objective is this.
That's CC3 and IPS2 and so on.
We don't have to get to the details of this. You don't have to know it. These are just well-defined steps that I need to do. Like, we'll talk about some of these as we go, يعني. But some of them like physical theft. يعني مش هعلمك physical theft، مش هعلمك تبقى حرامي يعني. إنما مثلا brute force, yes, we'll discuss what brute force means in a minute. Actually, we'll discuss that. ماشي. طيب, when we talk about security models, like any other system, in fact, you will use this a lot even in the course project. The first thing, really, you think about it to design any system or a technique or something is to model it. By model here, we mean like how can we visualize and characterize the system in a graphical way? Okay? So we do that actually in general. We do that, إحنا as engineers, we usually use modeling, okay, to characterize a certain functionality about any system. Okay? In security, we have some security models that characterize certain type of end-to-end security functionality, right? That can be provided, right? So there are very well established security models. One of them is for is to provide like confidentiality and non-repudiation and so on. So we have like a sender. This sender usually uses some kind of encryption or something to transform the plain text into a secure message. This secure message usually contains encryption, and it may actually, in fact, contain also some digital signature. It may, in fact, refer to a certificate of the user in order to provide non-repudiation. So by secure message here, we mean just multiple things. Encrypted, لا, but secure هنا is more general. Okay, more general. Secure, it might contain confidentiality. It might, in fact, embed into it also some digital signature, things like that. Okay? Once I have some secure message, I can send it over a channel. This channel could be wired, could be wireless. So you see that how this graphical representation sort of abstracts so many things in the actual world, right? So it abstracts مثلا channel. This could be wireless, could be wired, could be multiple nodes, could be single node, could be anything. Okay? But to me, this whole thing is abstracted to just pipe. So that's an intelligent way of representing so many things in a way that, you know, it characterizes what I want to work on, what I want to address. Okay? So this could be wireless, could be wired, could be anything. But there is some kind of a opponent or potential attacker who can listen to this channel. And that assumption has to always be there. Okay? The assumption that nobody's listening to my communication is a very naive assumption. Because there is. For sure. Day and night. Okay? So, so this secure communication or this secure message needs to have into it the proper mechanisms and the proper things or security labels or in order to make sure that this opponent will not be able to open this secure message and get what's inside. Okay? And sometimes in order to make this secure, we have to also engage a third party. This third party could be the certificate authority. Could be like a server to exchange some kind of authentication information. Okay? So in order to access Blackboard, I need to exchange my credentials. Your credentials actually goes to a separate server behind the scene. You don't know that. Okay? There is some kind of a server which is responsible for authentication. So there is that arbitrator or distributor or some kind of certificate authority which in fact ensures that this message is coming from authorized source, okay, and identifiable source. ماشي? And on the other side as well, we have to also engage for non-repudiation. I need to make sure that the receiver, in fact, is the one who received this message and no one else. ماشي كده? So this is the security model or the network security model. This network security model applies back in all the layers, all the layered stack. Usually this network security model is to be applied in every single layer. Okay? Except in IP مثلا, this channel usually is multiple routers or switches or something like this. واضح كده؟ طيب. There's another yeah, so the previous one, by the way, we will talk about it in chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 9, all of these chapters. They talk about the different layers, providing different, all of them, they can use that model. Okay? For all these layers, we can use this model. This model is slightly different. This model is for intrusion detection. Okay? This is the final chapter, I think 11 or 12. We'll talk about intrusion detection. Intrusion detection here, it defines what we call a gatekeeper function, which is usually a firewall. ماشي? Which tries to read or sniff or access all the incoming requests, and then it opens the door to the legitimate ones and tries to block on the non-illegitimate ones. Okay, so if you from the incoming requests to the network or to the whatever resource this is, server or database or whatever, it receives the incoming requests and then it decides, okay, so this request goes on. This request, no, stop. Okay, so this is another access security model that is also very common to use.
I think this model represents the sender and recipient in the previous model.
The sender? No. For us here, in this network access security model, we refer to upcoming requests as any kind of request. And here, there is some kind of a service that is running here, whether it's a database or a server or code server, anything here, Blackboard server, whatever. Okay? And I have some set of incoming requests. So which ones I should allow, which ones I should block?
Just like spam.
Yes, some kind of spam. So this could be like the gatekeeper can have, we'll discuss this in details in chapter 11. This can be, again, it can look at the upcoming requests, again, from different levels of layers. Okay, but at the end, it decides whether to let it go or to block.
It's like firewall.
It is firewall. It is the firewall. This is the firewall. طبعا, this is an abstract name for, or a generic name for it, because even the firewall itself, it has different forms, as we will talk about it in chapter 11. It has different forms. Could be software, could be done on the router level, could be done on a switch level, it could be done on multiple layers, single layer, could be done in a bunch of different ways. Okay, but for us, generically, we're talking about incoming requests. Should I let it go or should I stop? Okay. We will not discuss this as part of this course. This talks about the placement in computer system of logic that exploits vulnerability, اللي هي unwanted access. Basically بقى اللي هي information access threats. Usually this is related to information security. So there is a separate course called information security which talks mainly about how to secure code مثلا that runs on a server against any kind of placement of intrusions اللي هي بقى Trojans, viruses, things like that. Usually these kind of placement of unwanted entities, they are not network based. They don't have يعني ايه network aspect to it. Once they enter the network خلاص هم يعني viruses or Trojans or something like that runs back on the server and tries to do certain damage. Okay, but احنا in the course we will focus on the communication security aspect, not on these types of Trojans or viruses or something like that. This is covered in information security course. ماشي. Last thing is these are the standard entities, the most famous standard entities, which are يعني responsible for providing all the specifications for the security protocols and standards and so on. The most important one is NEST, and NEST here is mainly responsible for providing recommendations on the security mechanisms. So this is mainly in part 1, which we'll start in a minute, part 1 of the book, which is starting from chapter 2 all the way to chapter 4. Okay, chapter 2 to chapter 4, they cover most of the security mechanisms that we have talked about, whether about data signature techniques, of course encryption. We'll spend a huge amount of time on encryption techniques, padding, all of these things. And then in part 2 بقى covers اللي هم الايه the security protocols and standards. And ISOC usually اللي هو IETF. طبعا هنا في IFIPS sorry or FIPS. FIPS is the subgroup under NEST which is responsible for standardizing the security mechanism. Here we have a IETF. IETF is the subgroup under ISOC, which is responsible for the security protocols. Like there is RFC مثلا for like TCP. We have RFC for TCP, right? Similarly, we have RFC for TLS, which is the security standard in the transport layer level. ماشي? And these are to be covered in part 2. Okay? In addition to these, we talked about other يعني standard bodies or standard organizations like ISO, like ITUT مثلا. But these are usually minor ones يعني. But those are the biggest ones. ISO, IETF, and NEST. واضح كده? Okay. So that's the summary of chapter 1. So we talked about the basic definitions for computer security concepts. We talked about the architecture of security, the most important objectives, which are defined in different standard documentation, whether it's by NEST FIPS or by also IETF, including the confidentiality, integrity, non-repudiation, authentication, all of these possible objectives. We classified the security attacks into passive attacks and active attacks. And then we talked about the model of network security and standards. We talked about security services, including the ones I just mentioned, and security mechanisms, and so on. Okay? So this is the end of chapter 1. And again, chapter 1 gives like a very hazy kind of picture. It's a holistic picture, but it's very hazy currently. So we'll take back each part of this picture and we try to zoom in and make it clearer and clearer. Okay? So it's a progressive approach of trying to understand all of these techniques in a lot more details. Okay? So we can have I think so we can have يعني 10 minutes عشان برضو نعمل some kind of Okay, so continuing the discussion, we'll cover chapter 2. Chapter 2 here talks about symmetric encryption and message confidentiality. So symmetric encryption, we'll talk about the definition of symmetric encryption. Again, this is the symmetric encryption model. This is very similar to the security model we talked about, with some يعني small changes. So basically, we have a plain text, okay, X, and then using a certain key and a certain encryption algorithm, we need to convert that into a ciphertext. This ciphertext, it can be transferred over a channel, can communicate it between process to process, anything. And then there is a reverse algorithm that converts the ciphertext back into the plain text, given that this key and this key are equal. And in order to do that, there is like some kind of a mechanism behind the scene how to distribute and exchange that key. Because this sender and receiver, they might be on two separate machines over the network. So they need to have the same key in order to do the reverse operation and decrypt and get the plain text. So we'll talk about the different mechanisms. One of them, of course, is the AES. But before AES, we'll talk about DES and triple DES and so on. There are block ciphers and stream ciphers. We'll talk about the difference between these two types of ciphers and so on in the upcoming slides. So the requirement here is that this algorithm needs to be strong, and strong on its own is like it's not a fluffy word. Yani strong. Okay, strong. Yani the algorithm itself needs to have the property that makes the reverse engineering of the ciphertext back to the plain text. It's actually a very difficult task. And even again, that requires some careful considerations. To what extent it's difficult. So we'll define what difficult here means exactly. But in order for this to happen, we have another very important requirement. The sender and the receiver, they must obtain copies of the same secret key. And that, in fact, in some cases, it requires a separate mechanism for key distribution, key exchange, and so on. Type. The security of the symmetric encryption depends on the secret key, depends highly on the secret key, and not on the secrecy of the algorithm, because the algorithm itself is not secret. The algorithm itself is public. Okay? Everybody knows the algorithm. Okay? So the unknown here is the key and not the algorithm. Okay? Why do we need to make the algorithm public? In fact, this is very important, because if we don't make the algorithm public, then you will have different perceptions or different implementations of different algorithms, and systems or vendors will not be able to talk to each other. Okay? So the basic requirement is that the key has to be the same, but the algorithm itself is not a trade secret. It's not, there is no secrecy to it. The algorithm is public. So this makes the algorithm to spread very widely and very fast, because everybody knows it. So people can, in fact, implement it in their chips, implement it in their systems very fast. Okay? So manufacturers will be able to talk together, which is the basic concept of standards. Okay? Because otherwise I can do a very strong encryption algorithm and make it secret. Okay, nobody else will be able to use it except for me. Okay? I can secure a small system within my organization. I could do that. And in fact, this could be done مثلا in Pentagon or حاجة كده. They have their own proprietary kind of techniques and so on. But when it comes to communication, I cannot do that. I will not be able to talk to the outside systems, okay, if I use different encryption algorithms. واضح كده? So manufacturers will be able to implement these in chips, and the chips can be widely available and incorporated into different products. Even مثلا I can have a startup to implement these security algorithms on specific chips and sell these chips as IPs to Apple and Google and. You could do that. Because again, the main secrecy factor here is not the algorithm itself, it's actually the key. Okay? طيب. The cryptographic systems are generally classified in different dimensions or different categories. So the cryptographic algorithms, they perform certain operations. So they can be classified based on the operations that they perform. And these operations could be one of these three possible operations. One is substitution. By substitution here we mean that the encryption algorithm inside it, what it does or what it needs to do is that it takes the, there's like some kind of a plain text. This plain text, we can divide it into smaller pieces, okay? We take each piece, and then we have some kind of a lookup table. Okay? So from this piece, small piece, we get some value from the lookup table. This lookup table also, in many cases, is public. Okay? But we get this piece, and together with the key, we perform certain function, مثلا, and then, based on the value, we go into the lookup table, and then we get some substituted part, and then in this substituted part, we put it in the cipher text here. Okay? So this is in fact what we mean by substitution. The other possible operation is what we call transposition. Transposition here does not perform any substitution. In fact, what it does is that it looks at the cipher text here, and based again on some operation on the key, okay, it takes another part, okay, and it may swap. It swaps the different parts without having to substitute any values. ماشي? The third operation here is actually a combination of the first two ones. We can have some product which is a combination of substitution, substitution and transposition. Okay, so we perform that in different ways and in some cases in different levels, as we will see in a minute. Okay, to try to create some transformed content which has nothing to do with the original content. Okay. And as we will see, these operations, they can be public. Again, we know exactly what kind of substitution, but there is some kind of embedded, unknown parameter in each of these operations, which is the key. That's what we will see in a minute. ماشي كده واضح؟ طيب, this is the classification based on the consecutive operations that the encryption algorithm can do. There is another categorization to these encryption algorithms based on the number of keys that are being used. Because if there is one key, the sender and the receiver, they use the same key, we call that a symmetric encryption. Okay? Symmetric encryption talks about the use of the same key at the sender and the receiver. Okay? But there is another type, which is called the asymmetric encryption. Asymmetric encryption here talks about two keys. And again, this is two keys are used by the sender and two keys are used by the receiver. So each node will have a public key and a private key. Okay? They don't have to be the same. Each node will have a public key and private key. And based on that, the encryption algorithm in fact uses these keys for encrypting the message. And we'll see some mechanisms related to that. The RSA بالضبط اللي هو RSA, yes. ماشي كده؟ There is another way which is also very interesting and very important, and in fact we'll discuss that. We'll talk about this as part of the assignment, which is to classify the encryption algorithm into block ciphers and stream ciphers. Block ciphers and stream ciphers. That's very important. So by block ciphers here, we mean that we have the plain text, okay? We divide the plain text into blocks. So B0, B1, B2, and so on, right? And then we take each block, we apply the encryption algorithm per block, and we create some kind of ciphertext 0, okay? And so on. We get that, we apply the encryption algorithm, and we get ciphertext 1, okay? In some cases, we have what we call security operations as well, which can sort of rearrange these ciphertexts together in certain ways, and we have different ways of doing that. We'll talk about it again in the assignment. So that we generate some blocks, okay? Each block here refers or is correlated or it's dependent on one or more of these blocks. This is a straightforward way of doing the encryption, and this has some pros and cons. So by having each block in the ciphertext correspond to one or more blocks in the plain text, this is very strong from a security perspective, okay? And usually the reverse engineering from these blocks to the original blocks is hard, okay? And not hard again because of the secrecy of the algorithm, because it's public, but because we'll analyze this and we'll look at the different ways or the different factors that affect the strength or the robustness of being able to reverse engineer from the ciphertext to the block text. But in general, block ciphers are very strong from a security perspective. But the cons or the bad side of it is that any simple change in the ciphertext will make the decoding or the decryption to the block cipher not possible. بمعنى in so the ciphertext will get transferred over the network, right? And we said that we don't want to manipulate, صح, بس there are certain network introduced errors due to the channel impairments, okay? And these errors are usually, in certain applications, we can tolerate, okay? It does not represent manipulation by an attacker, okay? It's natural errors that happen due to some network impairments, okay? The problem here is that if there is one bit in the ciphertext that is in error, the reconstruction of the block text becomes impossible. Okay? So block ciphers are usually intolerable to network errors. ماشي?
Doctor, impossible as in the block text becomes or the
block text becomes corrupted. يعني أنت هنا يعني you would assume that if I have one bit in error, okay, it would be good news to have one bit in the block text that's in error, صح? But no. Yes, one bit in error here would lead to the whole block to be corrupted. So the decryption, even if it uses the same key, it uses everything, the decryption of the block becomes not possible. And that on its own has maybe some advantage related to integrity, صح? But in some cases, network introduced errors, it would be nice to have the mechanism also tolerable to network introduced errors. And in that case, it's not possible. طب is there any alternatives? Yes. اتفضل.
No chance for retransmission? No chances for retransmission?
لا خلاص لا هو retransmission or this depends on the protocol. لا this depends on the protocol. It's possible. This depends on the protocol. يعني TCP مثلا, if there is one bit in error, it will retransmit. ماشي? That's fine. But what if we use UDP? خلاص, will not be able to reconstruct it. But what if there is an image? What if this is a video? Video inherently is tolerable to errors. So encrypting video using block ciphers to transmit it over a network, it's not good. It's not efficient, because any small, tiny little part in error would lead to the whole video being corrupted, or big part of it being corrupted. You will experience this in the مش انت يعني بس they will experience this in the assignment. You will be able to analyze that in the assignment. ماشي؟
We cannot modify the
You can't, because you can't. You don't know the correlation between any introduced error in the ciphertext and the effect of this on the actual block. How can you correlate that?
Doctor, even if we include channel coding techniques where it's trying to get over.
لا, channel coding is used for different purpose. It's not for this. Channel coding is used after encryption or before encryption or something like this for different purposes. But this will not help here, because again, after encryption مثلا, it will try to recover. If it can recover from this error,
Yes.
okay, then it's fine.
that's what I was
Block size.
Yeah, if channel coding can be used to recover from potential errors, then it's fine. You can use some kind of channel coding techniques to recover whatever errors in the ciphertext, in which case the block will be recovered. But in some cases, that's not possible. Few questions ثانية confused.
Unless the block is a single.
In A?
Unless the block is a single digit.
It's a single bit. At the end of the day, here we're talking about binary bits. Yeah. Okay. طيب هو في alternative تاني which can make this encryption tolerable to errors? Yes. This is what we refer to as a stream ciphers. Stream ciphers here, they talk about the fact that if I have a plain text, okay, this is the plain text, okay, and I have a key. Using the key, we can generate some kind of a random, we'll talk about this, some kind of a random sequence which is based on the key. Okay? This is random sequence based on the key. Okay? Which is طبعا different, and it's secret because of the unknown key. And then what we do is that we just XOR this. We just XOR that random sequence to the plain text. Just XOR it. ماشي? It's a simple operation. ماشي? This XORing would make this obviously tolerable to any possible errors, because any introduced errors, طبعا هنا when we do this is the ciphertext. So the ciphertext here, okay, will be a combination of those two. Okay, so any introduced errors here will be localized. Will be actually localized. Okay. But the problem here is that the security strength in these protocols are weaker, as you can imagine. Why? In order to do that, there is some kind of a simple, مثلا, encryption algorithm, which is called, this is a very common technique, it's called Vernam cipher. The Vernam cipher talks about the fact that the ciphertext is actually the plain text XORed with the key, which is this one. Okay? This is a very simple, this is a very common technique, okay? And in fact, this is used, embedded in many of the encryption algorithms that even with block ciphers, we'll see that. The Vernam cipher is embedded inside many block ciphers. But the problem is that because of the transposition and the substitution and the XORing of this, it becomes really permuted in such a way that we have these block ciphers. But if we do it as a simple operation like this, okay, then we call this Vernam cipher. Type Vernam cipher. What is the security strength of the Vernam cipher? In order to analyze the performance of any encryption mechanism like this, unfortunately, we need to get into information theory and so on, which is not in the scope of the course. But there is a very simple and mathematical, well-established proof that Vernam cipher is indeed proof against the attack, assuming that the attacker knows only the ciphertext. بمعنى, if the attacker knows the ciphertext 0, ciphertext 1, ciphertext 2, and so on, okay, there is a mathematical proof that the only way to attack the Vernam cipher, okay, is brute force.
To get the key.
To get the key is brute force. Yani, you will just guess all types of combinations.
No correlation.
Because there's no correlation. By knowing the ciphertext, you cannot really guess the key in simple step. شوف simple operation of XOR made it difficult to try to get any idea about getting the key in any mathematical form. Okay? That's good news. But the bad news is the assumption that the attacker only knows the ciphertext is also naive. Why? The attacker does not use only brute force. He may or she may actually use traffic analysis. Traffic analysis, the attacker assumes other things other than the ciphertext. For example, the attacker may actually, in fact, assume that, okay, so Muhammad is talking to Amr, okay, and assuming that they are talking in English. So most probably they will start by saying Salam alaikum. Okay, so Salam alaikum, that could be one of the possible plain text in this conversation, okay? And I know it's at the beginning. So I can get ciphertext 0 and assume a certain value to it. Okay? If you know one simple value for the plain text, خلاص Vernam cipher, the key is what? Is the plain text XOR with the ciphertext 0 0. That's it. خلاص. I know the key. And the key is fixed, so خلاص. I know everything. ماشي? So all the strength that we talked about, they vanish by knowing only one plain text sample. Okay? That will not be valid for other block ciphers. For other block ciphers, even if you know ciphertext 0, 1, 2, 3 all the way to 10, and you know plain text 0, 1 all the way to 10, okay? Even if you know all of this, it's really hard for you to get the key. So the stream ciphers, they are tolerable to network errors, okay, but they are not strong in terms of security strength. Okay, so you'll be able to analyze both the assignment.
So basically, block ciphers are no one used them for the data transmission, right? So
No, I didn't say that. No. In fact, no, they are being used. They are much more common.
block ciphers.
Yes, they are much more common. They are much more common. But there are, yeah.
To solve the
Yes. Okay. So there are some ways to make the block ciphers behave like stream ciphers by introducing another operations to the block ciphers. Okay? You will do that as part of assignment 2 as well. You will see that some operations can be done on the block ciphers to allow them to behave close to being a stream ciphers, which is very interesting. Then you take the security strength of the block ciphers and the tolerance of the stream ciphers, which is very interesting. Okay. تمام كده؟ يعني again we're explaining so many things بس يعني when we discuss it will become clearer and clearer, you know. Now we know the difference between block ciphers and stream ciphers and what are the pros and cons of each one. واضح؟ تمام. طيب, there are types of attacks where, I mean, these types of attacks depends on the attack model بقى. يعني احنا the security analyst or the designer of the security protocol can in fact make certain assumptions about the attacker. Okay? That I assume that the attacker knows only the ciphertext. Okay? I can in fact make that assumption. You can argue this is naive, this is a strong assumption because the attacker knows more than that. Yes, that's fine, but that's my assumption. Okay? Based on that, we have what does the attacker know? The attacker knows the encryption algorithm and it knows the ciphertext only. Okay? If this assumption holds itself true, even Vernon cipher can in fact achieve the job. Okay? And it can perform very well. ماشي كده؟ We talked about this. طيب. But is that the only thing that the attacker may know? No, of course not. There is known plain text. So the attacker knows the ciphertext, of course, which is for free. It's known for free because it's transferred over the network, public. Everybody knows it. But in addition to this, the attacker may in fact, or the designer may in fact assume that the attacker knows more than that. The attacker knows some known plain text, which means that the attacker knows a ciphertext I and the plain text I that corresponds to that. Okay? So, in that case, as we proved to you, simply Vernon cipher will not work at all. We need a more complicated algorithm in that case. Then, but the attacker knows the algorithm because it's public. Okay? So we have to keep back the key. يعني اللعب كله يبقى على how to design the key in such a way that really makes the attack is really hard. ماشي كده؟ طيب. There is a chosen plain text. The difference between known plain text and chosen plain text is that the attacker can in fact choose the plain text by assuming that there is some kind of, so this is the sender, this is the receiver, and this is the attacker. Okay? The attacker may in fact have some ability to perform man-in-the-middle attack such that he can actually introduce some plain text to the sender. Okay? So this is plain text I, and ask the sender, okay, give me the ciphertext that corresponds to that. And the sender will naively say, oh, okay, here is the ciphertext I that corresponds to it. So the attacker, in fact, has certain level of compromise to the sender to, in fact, choose even what type of plain text that it can help me to know the key in the fastest way possible. If the attacker has this ability, then he can even control the plain text and give him some specific type of plain text pattern that allows the attacker later on to analyze the ciphertext and based on that reach to the key much faster. ماشي كده? It can do the same thing, which is the chosen ciphertext. It can do that on the receiver side. Okay, here is the ciphertext. Let me know what the plain text that corresponds to that. Because the receiver is expected to see some ciphertext coming from the sender, right? So somehow the attacker compromises the receiver, not the sender. Okay? So the attacker has some compromise to the receiver device. Okay? طيب خلاص, I will send him some ciphertext and ask him what is the plain text that corresponds to it. Yeah, same thing. ماشي? instead of doing it on the sender side, I can do it on the receiver side. Okay, I achieve the same objective, but in a reverse way. Okay.
Is it possible to send plain text over the network?
ما هو we assume that the attacker has a certain type of compromise to the receiver, or certain compromise to the sender. This compromise could be that مثلا I know certain user ID and password that I can use to log on to the system and somehow give the system some plain text and get some ciphertext that corresponds to it. Okay? Yeah, this does not necessarily mean that the plain text is going to be transferred over the network. No. ماشي? Chosen text here means either ciphertext or يعني the attacker may have compromise to both, in which case بقى خلاص بقى نلعب عليهم بقى. Give the plain text to the sender, give the ciphertext to the receiver, give me, I can perform the attack in no time. Okay? But again, this is based on the assumption that there is some kind of compromise. ماشي? That's usually, this is the very common attack model that's realistic, because assuming this will make the design of the encryption algorithm very hard. Usually people, they go into this level of known plain text. Okay? So using Vernam cipher or any kind of primitive type of algorithm is not enough. We have to do some permutation, substitution, transposition that makes the algorithm as strong as possible. ماشي كده؟ في أي سؤال؟ اتفضل.
So in block encryption, there are only those two operations possible, substitution and the other one. Those are the only.
We'll see يعني based on this يعني لا هو طبعا there are some other يعني operations. We'll talk about AS. In AS مثلا we do matrix multiplication. Okay, but these are well established mathematical operations that it can be done easily. But those substitution and transposition are usually the fundamental ones that need to be done. طبعا crypto analysis بقى is or traffic analysis in general is what we have been talking about, is that an encryption scheme is computationally secure if the ciphertext generated by the scheme meets one or both of the following criteria. This is very important. Now when we say difficult, when we say it makes it difficult, okay, and we said this is a fluffy word, so how can we define or put some clarity on the word that can make it difficult to the attacker? There's no such security mechanism that's 100% attack proof. Okay? We can always resort to brute force attack or brute force to guess the key. يعني مثلا, if the key itself has limited length, and we know that as part of the public specifications of the algorithm, yeah, for example, DES or DES, which we'll talk about, it uses a key size of 56 bits. Okay? So if we have 56 bits, how many combinations can we guess? Okay? To guess a key of a length 56. 2 to the power key. صح؟ This is the maximum. ده بس ده لا اعتمد يعني this is brute force بقى بس usually you will get to the answer way before that, because this is the maximum combinations.
Worst case.
This is the worst case scenario. Usually you get to the answer way before that. On average, you get to the answer in half the number of tries. Why? Because you assume that you have a probability of having the key having different values, and you have like uniform distribution, so you have different values of the key, which is like 2 to the power k values, okay? And the possibility of having any of these values is the same, okay? So on average, you can get to the right guess in half the trials. okay, which is 2 to the power k minus 1. This is the average. So the worst case is 2 to the power k, right? And the average number of trials is 2 to the power k minus 1, which is half. ماشي كده؟ So usually it's 2 to the power k minus 1. تمام كده؟ طيب, so this is the brute force. خلاص, طيب, 2 to the power 55 in the case of this. In fact, we can do that on a simple device in an hour. Nowadays. Even my mobile now, it has like 8 core CPU. I can do that in an hour. ماشي كده؟ طيب, this is not difficult. ماشي؟ طيب, so there are certain criteria بقى. So the cost of breaking the cipher exceeds the value of the encryption. And what that means is, مثلا I want to break bank account, okay? So bank account uses this, and in order to perform operations, let's say that the key is like 128 bits. So I need to perform operations 127 trials, okay, to get to the right answer on average. 127, 2 to the power 127 requires a server, ماشي, which costs $3,000. And I need that to break a bank account which has $2,000. Does that make sense? No, this is not. That doesn't make sense. So the value of the gain that I will get out of this attack, okay, is way less than the cost that I have to pay. Okay, or the time required goes beyond the lifetime of the key. يعني, what that means is, even مثلا I will use this. Okay, so I can perform 2 to the power 55 trials, ماشي, in an hour, fine. Okay, but the key changes every half an hour. Okay, the lifetime of the key is less than the time required for attack. And in fact, that's typically what happens in any security protocol. These keys, they have to change every now and then. We'll talk about this. So these keys have some kind of a lifetime. Okay. طيب, this is a very simple example اللي هو ال Caesar cipher. I think everybody knows Caesar cipher. You know the Caesar cipher, صح? Oh, it takes a key value اللي هو just a number, let's say 6 مثلا, and it just uses like some shift operation. So if you have like a plain text like this, you take مثلا, this is a letter A, okay? You take letter A in the alphabet, you know that A, B, C all the way 26 characters or something. Based on the key, you say A is in fact I. ماشي? So instead of A, I will put I. Based on what? Based on 6, and A is shift A in the alphabet, 6 positions, you get to, let's say, I ولا حاجة. ماشي? So instead of A, I will put I. Very simple. Very simple. Okay? طيب, how to analyze بقى this simple encryption algorithm? How to get to the strength of this security algorithm? Again, that requires بقى some kind of information theory. يعني we cannot quantify really the strength mathematically, except that if we go to some information theory. ماشي كده؟ Brute force, as we said, brute force, we explained what brute force means. We can do some guessing, and if we have certain key size, okay, so we can perform on average 2 to the power k minus 1 trials to get, this is the average, and the worst case is 2 to the power k. ماشي? Unless a plain text is provided, in which case بقى, we can in fact perform بقى some traffic analysis or crypto analysis. And crypto analysis بقى, it has some many algorithmic techniques. There are so many يعني attacks which are well defined in the literature, which can try to avoid the brute force or the exhaustive search يعني in general, to try to break the communication in less amount of time. Okay? Does that mean that every single security algorithm is breakable? Well, yes, but again, breakable in under what cost? Okay, and breakable in amount of time, which is maybe again higher than the lifetime of the key. That depends بقى. ماشي؟
So the attacker can know anything about the pattern of the keys. Like if you break key and key.
We'll talk about that.
you can-
We'll talk about this. We'll talk about it. Because again, these keys are generated from some kind of random generators or random sources. So these keys, they need to have certain properties that makes their guessing as hard as possible. In order to do that, these keys, they need to have certain properties, which we will talk about. We'll talk about later. So again, something that we did not talk about here is that if we do some brute force or something, okay, we guess the key. By guessing the key, what do we do? What we do is that we get the cipher text, because that's what we know, and we get the key, and then we perform the decryption algorithm, which is also known, okay? So the only unknown part is the key. خلاص, let's guess it. By guessing it, we put it in the decryption, and we get some kind of plain text. Okay. So now we need to have certain assumption on the plain text that allows us to say, oh, okay, so this plain text is correct, then stop. صح?
Yes.
Right. So we have to have certain assumption on the plain text. For example, we say that these people, they communicate in English. Okay, so whenever I get some plain text, it's garbage. As you can see, all of this plain text doesn't mean anything. Okay, I get some kind of meaningless text, right? But number 3 here, oh, okay, it looks like meet me after the toga party. Okay, so that looks like a proper sentence. Okay, so then we stop. We say, okay, so now the key is 3. واضح كده؟ So we need to have certain assumption on the plain text in order to have certain criterion for stopping. Okay, otherwise we'll go forever بقى. We'll try all the worst case trials. Okay, and we have no way of stopping, which is طبعا not efficient. ماشي كده؟ So that's usually what we brute force or traffic analysis. طيب. We have another 10 minutes. So we'll explain, we need to explain this because this is one of the most important encryption blocks. It's not an encryption algorithm itself, but NIST has actually come up with this, what we call fizzle or fistal encryption or fistal structure, okay? Which can perform these operations this way. We'll explain what that means. Okay? And in different levels, 16 different rounds. Okay? And NIST has come up with this, and they recommended this fizzle structure to the public community. And they said that this structure seems to have very strong behavior, okay, which is very hard to break. This is the recommendation from NIST. Then another group from NIST برضو, they used that fizzle structure and they said, okay, so let's incorporate this fizzle structure inside the first encryption algorithm, which is called DES, which is what we will talk about. Okay? So this structure has some strong security performance. Type. The way it works, it looks complicated, but it's actually very simple. And this is one of its strengths. It's that it's very simple. So you have some kind of a plain text. Usually the plain text is 64 bits. Okay? You divide it into left element 32 and right element 32. Okay? Then simply you take the right element and you apply certain function. This function could use some substitution, transposition, okay? Based on a value of K1. ماشي? And then the result will be XORed with the left element to form the right element 1. Okay? And then we will do that 16 rounds. يعني 16 rounds. Okay? ماشي كده؟ So that's what they recommended. طيب. We can transform this complicated thing into very simple mathematical operation. So basically, right element, this right element, I equals to left element of I minus 1, okay, left element of I minus 1, XORed, okay, with the function, this function is fixed in all rounds, okay, of Ki, okay, and the right element I minus 1. ماشي كده؟ طيب. And then left element بقى of I equals what? Very simple. Left element I equals to right element I minus 1. That's it. Those two simple equations, if you do them recursively for 16 rounds, خلاص, this is the physics structure. Okay? So by transforming this into mathematical equations, okay, we can characterize all this complicated logic into these two equations, and it's to be done recursively. Doing this is actually a real strength, because then we can take these and analyze them from information theoretic perspective. Okay, and then quantify the strength of this, which is, obviously, will not do as part of the course, but NIST has done this, and they have proven that doing it this way will make this encryption algorithm really strong. ماشي كده؟ طيب, why? اتفضل.
This function have certain algorithms different.
This function? Yeah, this function, they even left this function to be recommended by the designer.
And sender and receiver have to know.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Not only that, this function is publicly known. Okay, this function is publicly known. Like this, for example, as we will discuss it, this uses a certain function. Okay, so this will not leave it open. لا, this define a specific function, and we'll talk about how it looks like. ماشي? And they define certain number of rounds, and they use the physics structure in a way, and they modified a little bit before and after. They did some like interface, okay, at the entry part and at the exit part in such a way that makes a very well-defined structure, which uses inside it the physics structure. And they said by using the physics structure, we can incorporate all the strength of this physics structure, okay, into the DES algorithm. Okay, but this structure is like some kind of ingredient. عارف كده انت بتاخد مثلا some ingredients to do certain recipe. This is one kind of a critical ingredient that designers later on they took and they designed this around this. ماشي؟ طبعا ال decryption talks about the reverse operation. اتفضل.
Did we mention how we share the key between the sender and receiver?
لا, we didn't talk about this. We'll talk about it in a later stage. But the question that I was expecting, we have K1, K2, K3. We talked about one key. Okay, so what is the relationship between K1, K2, K3, and the key? In fact,
Should be random keys.
yeah, what happens is that we have another technique which is called sub key algorithm, which takes one key and then again performs certain kind of permutation to it to get to all these keys. So this is in fact also like F. It's a function that performs certain permutation to provide multiple keys based on one single key. ماشي كده؟ طبعا في هنا برضو some operation after round 16, okay, which is like this simple swapping. طب هتقول لي طب ليه احنا عملنا السواpping ده هنا؟ هقول لك طب هو ليه 16؟ ليه مش 17؟ okay. Okay. They define the structure this way and they prove their strength using some, again, information theoretic aspects. Lay 16, okay, so as we can imagine, the more rounds we have, right, the more depths. It's like, عارف انت to understand this, عارف deep learning, okay? By having like depth in the machine learning model, okay, we can incorporate more complex function. Here, by having more depth, we in fact increase the strength of the algorithm. Okay, so make it 60. Why 16? لا, ما هو there is some kind of trade-off because the more rounds we have, the more complex the algorithm is gonna be, right? طب where to stop بقى؟ هم they decided to stop on 16. ليه؟ ما هو كده.
Sometimes maybe we can use it in some system, and the other we can because the capability of computing capability. Maybe we can do it.
That's another thing. That's another thing. This is different because Nest here defines, it's not like arbitrarily chosen. Round 16 is fixed. Okay, here is fixed.
For a reason.
For a reason. يعني for a reason which again, it makes this analysis quantifiable. Okay, based on that, they put the recommendation that this will be 16. And in fact, it's used in this as 16, like this. Okay, but this is not to say that we cannot modify it. It's like dead in stone. لا, هي مش dead. يعني we can use this as part of another, like you said, we can put it as part of another block, and we have multiple blocks. Like مثلا, we'll talk about triple DES, because as we will discuss, DES is breakable, especially using nowadays devices. Is easily breakable.
Even after the 16 rounds.
Yeah, even after 16 rounds. Because again, I mean, it's not because Fizzle is weak. لا, it's because of the size of the key. The size of the key for DES is actually 56. This structure is proven to be very strong. And the only way you can attack this is by brute force. يعني not the only way, بس يعني you need to have brute force in order to attack this systematically. Okay? But that's because of the length of the key, not because this Fizzle structure is weak. لا, Fizzle structure is proven to be strong. And not only that, the fact that this can be simply defined by using mathematical equations like this recursively makes it really easy to analyze and makes it easy to implement. And they implemented this in many hardware chips. Okay? It has lots of strength, really. So this Fizzle structure, the performance of this structure depends on so many things. It depends on some factors. Of course, we apply the encryption algorithm on specific blocks. Okay? So as the block size increase, okay, it becomes difficult to, because the block size, when we increase the block size, typically كمان we increase the key size in many ways, okay? This is for DES, I'm talking in general. In general, okay, this block size affects the performance of the how much time we need to break this. Again, all types of algorithms are breakable, okay, but the cost. But it's just a matter of the cost. So that by using large block sizes, we increase the cost. by using larger keys, we increase the cost. Right? Number of rounds, of course. But all of these, again, these are trade-off parameters. Increasing the size of the key makes it hard. However, increasing the size of the key makes it also more complex. More complex معناها more overhead. معناها before you communicate one single message, you have to do very complex operation, which increases delays, increases so many things. There is also the sub-key generation, which is what we talked about. Also that, it's like the F, the function F, this round function. This round function can be complex, can be very simple. اللي هي F اللي احنا شفناها دي. It's a black box. It can be a Vernam cipher, the simplest form, or it can be very complicated. صح? Again, by controlling the complexity of this round function, or controlling the sub-key generation algorithm, sub-key generation can be simply based on some circular shift. مثلا, okay? Can generate multiple keys, but just by making like some circular shift. Very simple operation. Is that complex enough? Maybe no. Okay? So all of these factors, they affect the طبعا one of the things برضه اللي هي ايه is the algorithm يعني designed in such a way that simplifies the software implementation of it, or it has to be done in hardware. In other words, the operations that I'm performing, are they efficient to be done in software or hardware? Physics structure, okay, is really expensive to be done in software. Why? Because it's always based on bit level shift operations. We'll discuss that more in details next time. ماشي? Which makes it more optimized for hardware implementation. ماشي? Hardware is more efficient into a bit level operation, صح? Software is usually very, very inefficient in bit level operations. And you will see, you experience that in assignment 2. You will see that this is extremely slow. I can warn you from now. يعني some students, they have been running the assignment يعني in the last 2 days. It's not finishing. Because this is very slow. ماشي؟ طيب. Ease of analysis, that is what we talked about. يعني the fact that we can analyze this using very simple mathematical operations. ماشي? We have stripped down all these blocks into 2 simple equations. صح? And looking at these simple equations, I can analyze the strengths of the algorithm using this simple mathematical equation. And this is one of the strengths of the physics structure.
So the more easy to analyze is the strong.
It's actually is a strong factor. So by the fact that it's complex to break, it doesn't mean that it has to be complex to understand. ماشي? So abstracting the complexity of the physics structure into mathematical equations makes it really easy for people to understand. Yet it's complex to break. That's a beauty. يعني this is good. ماشي? So now, الناس بتوع information theory can take these equations, اشتغل يا عم. ماشي? Analyze the performance. الناس بتوع الهاردوير, okay, take these bit operations, design your own chip for physics structure. Physics structure can be embedded inside many blocks, مثلا to do disk, triple disk, things like that. Okay, can be widely spread into vendors, different vendors, iPhones, Galaxy, things like that. ماشي كده؟ Okay, enough. خلاص.